A cracked windshield, a sneering face. "Your car doesn't belong here." Her Lamborghini roared, a mechanical laugh, until the flames swallowed everything. The sun, a relentless golden fist, beat down on the freshly paved asphalt of the St. Augustine's gated community. It wasn't just a neighborhood. It was a fortress of wealth where manicured lawns were tended with military precision, and the only sounds were the distant hum of electric lawnmowers and the quiet sigh of money being spent. My car, a faithful 15-year-old Honda Civic with more dents than a tin can at a shooting range, felt less like a vehicle and more like a defiant middle finger planted in the middle of this pristine landscape. Its peeling paint and rust spots were a testament to a life lived, a stark contrast to the gleaming Teslas and immaculate SUVs that lined the curbless streets. I was a delivery driver for a high-end organic meal service, a gig that paid just enough to keep the engine running and the dream of a less dented life alive. My destination was 1422 Havenwood Lane, a colossal modernist mansion with more glass than a skyscraper and a driveway that could double as a landing strip. As I pulled up, the Civic's ancient engine protested with a series of coughs and sputters, a sound that felt deafening in the otherwise silent air. I grabbed the thermal bag filled with artisanal quinoa salads and gluten-free pastries, the weight of it a familiar ache in my shoulder. That's when I saw her, a woman, perfectly coiffed with hair that looked as if it had been sculpted by a deity, was gliding towards me from her front porch. She was a walking advertisement for conspicuous consumption, draped in a designer silk caftan and clutching a handbag that cost more than my entire net worth. Her expression was a masterclass in passive-aggressive distaste. "You're lost," she stated, her voice as sharp and brittle as breaking glass. It wasn't a question. I offered a polite practice smile. "No, ma'am. I have a delivery for the Jenkins family." Her eyes narrowed, raking over my car with an expression of pure revulsion. "That vehicle doesn't belong in our community. You should have parked on the street." I glanced at the perfectly empty street. The only other car was a pristine white Lamborghini parked with the effortless arrogance of an object that knows its own value. The instructions said to pull into the driveway for a contactless delivery. I don't care what the instructions said. "This is a disgrace." She gestured vaguely at my car as if it were a biohazard. "This is a high-end community. We have standards." A wave of frustration, hot and bitter, washed over me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to remember the golden rule of customer service. The customer is always right, even when they're a textbook example of unadulterated entitlement. "I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. I'll be out of your way in a minute," she huffed, her meticulously applied makeup unable to conceal the fury in her eyes. "You're a delivery driver. You're paid to serve. Don't you dare get an attitude with me." She took a step closer, her voice dropping to a condescending whisper. "I'll be calling your supervisor about this. People like you just don't get it." My hand tightened on the handle of the thermal bag. "People like you?" The words hung in the air, a verbal poison dart. I wasn't just a delivery driver. I was a student, working 2 jobs to pay for tuition. I was the eldest son of a family who had sacrificed everything for me to have a chance at a better life. She saw a beat-up car and a scruffy uniform, and she made a judgment, a dismissal of my entire existence. I didn't say another word. I simply placed the thermal bag by the front door, snapped a quick photo for proof of delivery, and turned on my heel. As I walked back to my car, I could feel her eyes burning holes in my back. I got in, the worn-out seat cradling me like an old friend, and started the engine. The Civic rumbled to life, a testament to its stubborn refusal to die. I pulled out of the driveway, my gaze drawn to the immaculate Lamborghini. It was a beautiful machine, a predator in a world of prey, all sleek lines and aggressive angles. A car that, for her, was a symbol of her status. For me, it was just a car. As I reached the end of the long driveway, preparing to turn onto the main street, I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time. I saw her standing there on her porch, still watching me. She was talking into her phone, her expression a mixture of righteous anger and smug satisfaction, no doubt calling my supervisor to report the disgrace of my presence. A bitter smile touched my lips. She probably thought she had won. She had put me in my place, a lowly delivery driver who didn't belong. I shifted into drive, and a low, guttural roar echoed through the silent street. It wasn't my car. It was a different sound, a sound of something big and powerful coming to a stop. I glanced back and my blood ran cold. The Lamborghini. Its hood was smoking, a thin, sickly plume of white smoke curling into the air. My mind, still replaying the confrontation, struggled to process the new information. I hit the brakes, a primal part of me wanting to flee. Another part, the part that had just been so thoroughly belittled, wanting to see what happened next. The smoke thickened, turning from white to an ominous inky black. It poured out from the car's grill, obscuring the front half of the vehicle. I saw her on the porch, her phone still pressed to her ear, her perfect posture gone, replaced by a sudden panicked slouch. She was no longer a high society tyrant. She was just a woman watching her pride and joy choke on its own fumes. And then, a tiny lick of orange flame danced at the base of the windshield. It was hesitant at first, a shy tongue tasting the air. Then it grew bold, feeding on the rich black smoke. The flames spread with a terrifying speed, a hungry beast devouring everything in its path. The once pristine Lamborghini was now a pyre, its sleek lines distorted by the heat, the gleaming white paint blistering and peeling away like sunburnt skin. The sound of the fire was a ferocious crackle, a sound of pure, unadulterated destruction. Her scream was a sharp, high-pitched shriek of pure horror and disbelief. It was a sound that had no place in this manicured world. The phone fell from her hand, forgotten. She stood frozen, watching her status symbol, the very car she had used to belittle me, burn to a molten ruin. The flames roared, a final, thunderous laugh, a spectacle of karmic justice that felt as though it had been summoned by the universe itself. My hand trembled as I put my car back in park, my eyes locked on the inferno. The heat from the fire, even from this distance, was palpable. And I knew, with an icy certainty, that this wasn't just a random accident. The story had just begun. The heat radiating from the inferno was a physical presence, a monstrous dragon's breath that warped the air and danced across my windshield. I was a spectator to the destruction, a lone witness to the fiery demise of a $500,000 machine. The initial shock had given way to a strange, numb fascination. My hands, still on the steering wheel, were clammy. The righteous indignation that had fueled me just moments ago was replaced by a hollow pit of dread. This wasn't just a car burning. This was a symbol of everything I resented, and it was going up in flames right in front of me, a spectacle so dramatic it felt unreal. From my rearview mirror I could see her, the woman I had just delivered food to. She was no longer the composed, condescending figure of a moment ago. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, and her expensive silk caftan clung to her body as she stood rooted to the spot, a statuesque figure of pure, unadulterated panic. Her phone lay abandoned on the manicured grass, a testament to the suddenness with which her world had been turned on its head. She was screaming, but the sound was thin and lost against the roar of the fire. Suddenly, a security patrol golf cart, the kind with St. Augustine's emblazoned on the side, came zipping down the street. The guard, a stout man with a permanent scowl, slammed on the brakes, his eyes widening at the sight of the blazing car. He fumbled with his radio, his voice a series of shocked stammers. In a flash, a small crowd began to gather, drawn by the siren song of calamity. A woman in yoga pants, a man walking a fluffy white dog, and a teenager on a skateboard all stopped to gawk. Their faces a mixture of horror and morbid curiosity. A siren wailed in the distance, a harbinger of official chaos. The fire department was on its way. I knew I couldn't stay here. Being the sole witness to a car fire, especially one that belonged to a resident who had just threatened to get me fired, was a terrible idea. I was the one who was supposed to be a stain on this perfect neighborhood. Now her car was. I put my old Civic in drive, the engine a reassuring purr against the fiery backdrop. I pulled a U-turn and headed back towards the front gate, away from the scene. As I drove, I saw her, the woman collapsed to her knees on the pristine driveway, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Her husband, a man in a crisp polo shirt, came running out of the house, his face contorted in alarm. I sped out of the gate, leaving the pandemonium behind. My mind was a jumble of emotions, relief, shock, and a peculiar sense of vindication that felt both exhilarating and deeply unsettling. I had done nothing to that car. I had simply been present. Yet the timing was so perfectly, brutally poetic that it felt like a direct consequence of her cruelty. The universe, it seemed, had a dark sense of humor. I pulled into a small, nondescript parking lot a few miles away, my hands still gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. It was a text from my boss, a perfunctory message asking if I had completed the delivery to 1422 Havenwood Lane. I replied with a simple, yes. A moment later, another text came through. Customer called. Said you were rude. Said your car was a disgrace. Don't want to lose this account. Be careful. My heart sank. So she had made the call. The wheels of her retribution had been set in motion before her own world had come to a screeching halt. I took a shaky breath. I had to think. The Lamborghini was a high-profile target. The police and probably the fire marshal would be involved. They would question everyone in the vicinity, and that included me. The delivery service's records would put me at the scene at the exact moment the fire started. My rusty, beat-up Civic would be a glaring point of suspicion, a symbol of everything she had accused me of. The woman, consumed by her own grief and embarrassment, would likely point the finger at me. He was here. He was the only one here. He was angry. The phone buzzed again. This time it was an unknown number. I hesitated, then answered. Hello? I said, my voice barely a whisper. This is Detective Ramirez, St. Augustine's Sheriff's Office. I understand you were just at 1422 Havenwood Lane for a delivery? A cool, professional voice said. My heart hammered against my ribs. Yes, I was. Can you tell me what you saw? The detective asked, his tone neutral, but I could feel the invisible weight of his authority. My mind raced. This was the moment of truth. I could tell him the truth, the whole story, and risk sounding like a crazy person trying to justify a car fire with a tale of class warfare. Or I could be vague, try to distance myself from the scene and risk looking guilty. A bead of sweat trickled down my temple. The detective was waiting. The memory of her screaming face, her collapsing on the ground, and the ferocious fire was etched in my mind. She was the one who had started this. With her words, her judgment, her call to my boss, now I had a choice to make. One that would dictate the rest of my night, and maybe the rest of my life. I took a deep breath. I was just leaving the property, I said, my voice gaining a deceptive calm. I saw smoke coming from the hood of the Lamborghini as I was pulling out. And then, I paused, a theatrical beat. I saw her, the homeowner. She was on the phone, looking at me, and then the whole car just went up in flames. I left out the part about the confrontation, about the insults, about her call to my boss. I let the words hang in the air. A different kind of accusation, one that placed her at the scene, with the phone, just as her pride and joy began to burn. It wasn't a lie, not exactly. It was an omission, a strategic piece of storytelling. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. The detective was processing my words, weighing them against some unknown metric. You saw the homeowner on the phone looking at you as the car caught fire? He asked, the slightest hint of interest now in his voice. Yes, I confirmed, my heart pounding in my chest. It was very strange. The line went dead. He didn't say goodbye. He just hung up. I put my phone down, my hand shaking. I had just shifted the focus of a police investigation from me to her, subtly, without her even knowing it. She wanted a war, a petty battle of social status. She had no idea she had just entered a much bigger fight, one where the stakes were now a burnt-out Lamborghini and a police investigation. And for the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt a grim, exhilarating sense of control. The phone call from Detective Ramirez left a phantom weight in my hand, a ghost of the connection that had just linked me to a world I had no business being in. The silence in my car, once a comforting solitude, now felt heavy, charged with the unspoken consequences of my words. I sat there for a long time, the glow of the dashboard lights illuminating the swirling dust on my windshield. The adrenaline that had spiked during the fire was ebbing, replaced by a cold knot of anxiety in my stomach. I had just, in a moment of self-preservation, pointed a professional finger of suspicion at a woman who had, by all accounts, done nothing but have a bad day. I told myself it was justified that she had started this. But a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered that I was now playing a dangerous game. I drove home on autopilot, the familiar route a blur of streetlights and passing traffic. My apartment, a small one-bedroom walk-up above a laundromat, felt less like a sanctuary and more like a flimsy shelter. I dropped my keys on the counter, the jangle a discordant sound in the quiet space. My phone lay on the table, a silent harbinger of impending trouble. I knew she would be enraged. When she discovered the police were no longer just looking into the disgrace of my car, but were now asking questions about her, her fury would be unimaginable. The thought of her perfect, composed face contorted with rage was almost a comfort. She had looked at me and seen a stereotype, a human stain on her pristine world. She had judged me based on my car, on my job, on my perceived place in the social hierarchy. Now, the very system she believed she controlled was looking at her. The irony was a bitter-sweet poison. I was startled from my thoughts by a frantic knock on my door. My heart leaped into my throat. Who could it be? My mind immediately jumped to the worst possible scenarios. The police? The woman? A reporter? I slowly walked to the door and peered through the peephole. A tall man with a neatly trimmed beard and an anxious expression was standing on my landing. He was dressed in a sleek suit, looking completely out of place in the grimy hallway. He held a card in his hand. I unlatched the door and opened it just enough to speak. "Can I help you?" "Yes, my name is Marcus." "Marcus Caldwell," he said, holding up the card. "I'm a private investigator." My blood ran cold. "A private investigator?" "I think you have the wrong person." He gave me a weary smile. "I don't think so. I'm looking for the delivery driver who was at 1422 Havenwood Lane this afternoon. A Mr. Ryan Jenkins. I have the right name, right?" He had my name. The panic in my gut intensified. I can't help you." "I was just making a delivery." "I know," he said, his voice calm and persuasive. "I'm not here to get you in trouble. I'm working for the owner of the house, the woman who owns the Lamborghini." "What do you want?" I asked, a tremor in my voice. "I just want to know what you saw," he said, his gaze intense. "My client, Mrs. Jenkins, is completely distraught." The police questioned her. They asked her if she was on the phone, looking at you as the fire started. "She's beside herself." "She insists she wasn't. She says you told the police that. My strategic omission." It had already made its way to the police and back to her. My gamble had paid off, but the consequences were now standing on my doorstep in the form of a polished private investigator. I suddenly felt a wave of nausea. I had not considered this possibility that she would hire her own people to find out what had happened. "I just told the police what I saw," I said, my voice firmer now. I was done being a doormat. I had to stick to my story. The car started smoking as I was leaving. I saw her on her phone looking in my direction. Then the fire started. That's it. Marcus Caldwell's eyes didn't waver. He was a professional, trained to read people, to spot a lie. "Mrs. Jenkins says she was calling her husband." "Not you. She says her husband was right there." "Why would you tell the police she was looking at you?" I leaned against the doorframe, my voice dropping to a low, intense whisper. "Because that's what happened." She was angry. She had just called my boss to complain about me. She was still on the phone when I left. I saw her. Maybe she was calling her husband. Maybe she was calling the fire department. I don't know. All I know is what I saw. She was standing there with a phone to her ear, and her car was on fire. I watched him, searching for a flicker of doubt, a sign that he believed me. He didn't. He simply nodded slowly. "And you have no idea why the fire started?" "No," I said, my voice now full of a weary truth. "I was just a delivery driver. I wasn't in her car. I didn't touch it. I didn't even get close to it." He finally looked away from my face, his gaze drifting towards my worn-out Honda Civic, visible from my window. His expression was unreadable. "Okay. Thank you for your time, Mr. Jenkins." He turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the silence of the stairwell. I watched him descend, a sense of foreboding settling over me. He wasn't just investigating a car fire. He was investigating me. He was here to find out if I had a motive, if I was the kind of person who would set a car on fire out of spite. The confrontation at the mansion, my car, my job, my social class, it was all part of his analysis. The woman had not only set the police on me, she had now sicked a private investigator. This was not a random act of karma. This was now a personal, escalating war, and I was now a key figure in her burning world. The night stretched on, a long, suffocating blanket of dread. The visit from the private investigator, Marcus Caldwell, had shattered the fragile peace I'd managed to build after the fire. I couldn't shake the image of his eyes, so calculating and cold as he'd scanned my car and my apartment building. He hadn't found anything, but the feeling of being a suspect, of being sized up and judged, was an acrid taste in my mouth. My small, safe world now felt exposed, its seams torn open for a stranger to poke and prod at. I couldn't sleep. Every distant siren, every car that passed on the street sent a jolt of panic through me. I was no longer a witness. I was a pawn in a wealthy woman's game of vengeance. My phone rang just as the first sliver of dawn bled into the sky. It was a restricted number. My heart pounding, I answered. "Ryan Jenkins?" a stern, familiar voice asked. It was Detective Ramirez. "Yes," I said, my voice thick with sleep and fear. "I need you to come down to the station. We have a few follow-up questions about the incident at St. Augustine's." "Now?" I asked, a wave of cold dread washing over me. "I have to work. It's not a request, Mr. Jenkins," the detective said, his voice hard. "It's in your best interest to cooperate." The implication was clear. If I didn't go voluntarily, he would come for me. I felt the last vestiges of my control slipping away. I was no longer just a delivery driver caught in a strange situation. I was a person of interest. I drove my beat-up Civic through the quiet morning streets, the rust spots and peeling paint feeling like a scarlet letter. The police station was a grim, brutalist building, its concrete walls a testament to the cold reality of justice. Inside, the air was stale and filled with the faint smell of old coffee and disinfectant. I was led to a small interrogation room. It was nothing like the movies. No bright lights, no two-way mirrors, just a small metal table and 2 chairs. Detective Ramirez walked in, followed by a younger, more casually dressed officer. Ramirez's face was a mask of professional neutrality, but his eyes held a keen, analytical glint. He set a file down on the table with a soft thud. The file was thick. "Mr. Jenkins," he began, not bothering to sit. "Let's go over your statement. You said you saw Mrs. Jenkins on the phone looking at you as the car caught fire. Is that correct?" "Yes," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. I had to stick to my story. The subtle shift I'd made from "she was calling my boss" to "she was on the phone looking at me" was my only defense. "And you insist you did not have a conversation with her before you left?" The other officer, whose name was apparently Detective Lee, asked. My mind flashed back to the moment on the driveway. Her sneering face, her hateful words. "Your car doesn't belong here. People like you." I knew if I told them about our interaction, it would give them a clear motive. They would see me as the scorned, angry delivery driver who, in a fit of rage, had somehow torched a Lamborghini. "We had a brief exchange about the delivery," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Nothing significant." Ramirez leaned against the table, his eyes boring into mine. "Mr. Jenkins, you lied to us." The words hit me like a physical blow. My carefully constructed composure cracked. I didn't. We have Mrs. Jenkins's statement. She says you got into an argument. She says you were furious. She says you yelled at her. Which one of those things is true?" My heart pounded against my ribs. She had exaggerated, twisted the truth to make me look like the aggressor. She's lying. "I didn't yell. I was professional. She was the one who was rude." "Oh, she was rude?" Ramirez's tone was laced with sarcasm. "So now you have a motive. A rich woman insulted you, and a few minutes later her $500,000 car is a smoking ruin. That's a powerful coincidence, wouldn't you say?" I clenched my fists under the table. They weren't just questioning my statement. They were trying to build a case against me. They were painting a picture of an angry, disenfranchised delivery driver pushed to his limit. It was the same stereotype she had seen, now weaponized by law enforcement. I didn't do anything, I said, my voice low and shaking. I'm a student. I work 2 jobs. I don't have time to burn cars. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Then why did you lie about the confrontation? Detective Lee asked, his voice sharper now. Why did you try to pin this on her by saying she was on the phone, looking at you as the fire started? I had no answer. My subtle act of revenge had backfired spectacularly. I had tried to be clever to turn the tables, and now it had all come crashing down. I had dug my own grave with my words, and I had no way of climbing out. They had me. The motive. The opportunity. The contradictory statement. Just as the silence in the room became unbearable, a phone buzzed. It was Ramirez's. He answered, his eyes still on me, never breaking contact. He listened for a moment, his face impassive. Then, a slow look of surprise and disbelief spread across his face. Okay, he said into the phone, his voice a low, stunned whisper. Thank you. We'll be right there. He hung up, his gaze now focused on Detective Lee. That was the fire marshal's office, he said, the words heavy with import. They found something in the debris, a small piece of what looks like an electronic device, the same type used in remote starters, except this one was modified. They think it was an explosive device. A bomb. The air went out of the room. The detectives' faces, once filled with suspicion, were now a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. This wasn't a spontaneous combustion. This wasn't a random electrical fire. This wasn't a furious delivery driver. This was a targeted, premeditated act of violence. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a murder attempt, and the target wasn't the car. It was the person who was supposed to be in it. And Mrs. Jenkins was supposed to have been in that car. Ramirez looked at me, a new, chilling thought dawning in his eyes. You said she was on the phone looking at you as the fire started. Is it possible she was distracted? Maybe she was supposed to be in the car at that exact moment, but she was out of it? I didn't answer. I couldn't. The world was spinning. A bomb. My small act of defiance, my bitter sense of vindication, now felt insignificant and utterly hollow. A woman I hated for her arrogance had been seconds away from being a victim of a targeted attack. My story hadn't just gotten me in trouble. It had inadvertently provided the key piece of the puzzle that had just saved her life. My presence, my small, pathetic act of defiance, had distracted her from getting in the car. Her rudeness, her condescension, her petty cruelty had made her miss a date with death. And I, the man she so despised, had been an unwitting instrument of her survival. The air in the interrogation room, once thick with accusation, now vibrated with a different kind of tension. Detective Ramirez and Detective Lee were no longer looking at me as a suspect, but as a key witness to something far more sinister. The word bomb hung in the air, a chilling specter that eclipsed all the petty drama that had brought me here. The Lamborghini, once a symbol of opulence and arrogance, was now a potential crime scene for attempted murder. My small, personal struggle with Mrs. Jenkins felt trivial and foolish in the face of this new reality. Ramirez ran a hand over his face, a gesture of sheer exhaustion. A bomb, he repeated, as if the word itself was hard to believe. Someone tried to kill her, and the device was set to go off when she started the car. He looked at me, a new kind of intensity in his eyes. Tell me everything again, Mr. Jenkins, from the moment you pulled into the driveway. Don't leave out a single detail. I took a deep breath, the taste of stale air and fear on my tongue. The story I told this time was the whole truth, unfiltered and raw. I told them about her disdainful look, her condescending words about my car, the people like you comment. I recounted her threat to call my boss, the call she was on as I was leaving, and my decision to drive away just as the smoke appeared. I left nothing out. The detectives listened in silence, their expressions a mix of grim fascination and professional detachment. So she was outside the car on her phone because she was calling your boss? Detective Lee clarified, a new respect in his tone. Yes, I said. She was furious. She was still on the phone when the smoke started. I saw her look at the car, then back at me, as if she couldn't believe what was happening. Ramirez leaned forward, his voice a low, focused whisper. And your presence there, your little confrontation, made her stop what she was doing. She was out of her routine. That's why she wasn't in the car when the bomb went off. The full weight of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. Her cruelty, her classism, Her petty desire to punish me for my social standing had been the very thing that had saved her life. She had been so consumed by her hatred for my car that she had missed a date with death. It was a dark, twisted kind of irony, the universe's ultimate joke. "This changes everything," Ramirez said to his partner, his eyes still locked on me. The person who did this wouldn't have known about the confrontation. They would have expected her to be in the car. This was a sophisticated, planned attack, and we need to find out who had a motive to kill Mrs. Jenkins. My role shifted instantly from suspect to a key player in an attempted murder investigation. I was no longer a guy who had been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I was the guy who had unknowingly saved a life. The detective's questions now focused on her. What did I know about her? Had I seen anyone else? Were there other cars? I told them about the private investigator, Marcus Caldwell, who had shown up at my door. He works for her husband, I explained. He said she was hiring him because she was suspicious about what I told the police. She didn't believe I was just a delivery driver who happened to be there. Ramirez exchanged a look with Lee, a silent communication passing between them. She hired a private investigator who works for her husband? Ramirez said, the gears turning in his mind. That's interesting. I didn't know why, but I could feel the shift in the investigation. They were no longer focused on my beat-up Honda or my flimsy motive. They were focused on the deep-pocketed, intricate world of the St. Augustine's community, a world of secrets and betrayals that I had only seen from the outside. I was finally allowed to leave the station. The early morning light felt blinding as I stepped out, the air crisp and clean. The weight in my stomach had lessened, but a new, heavier one had taken its place. I had walked into a fire, but I had just stumbled into a war. The woman I despised, the one who had so casually dismissed my humanity, was now someone I had to protect, an unwitting accomplice in her survival. I drove home, my mind reeling with the implications. A bomb. Someone wanted her dead. And I, the guy with the rusty Honda, was now the only thing standing between her and a killer who was still out there, possibly waiting for another chance. The petty class war that had started this had been a smokescreen for something far more dangerous, and I was in the middle of it.